Hello everybody, and welcome to our webinar series, Navigating the Cloud. My name is Michelle Nerlinger, and I'm your moderator today. This is the fourth of a series of webcasts that will explore the most critical aspects of introducing and managing SaaS applications. Software pricing and packaging is an art form, regardless of whether it be delivered as a service or otherwise. Today's webcast will describe how ISVs can build, execute, and manage effective software pricing and packaging strategies for cloud services. Whether the aim is to build customer base for a new offering, to introduce a cloud service to complement an established on-premise business, or ultimately to migrate an established on-prem business to the cloud. At the end of this presentation, you'll be confident in your ability to tackle software pricing and packaging today, tomorrow, and beyond. Our presenters today are Amy Konary, IDC's Director of Software Pricing, Licensing, and Delivery, and Jake Fox, SafeNet's Director of Software Monetization Product Development. Amy and Jake will first reveal emerging best practices and software publisher success stories, and then dive into what we will hope will be a very interactive Q&A session. Before we get started, I would like to remind you that questions can be submitted at any time during the live webcast. Simply click the questions button on your screen and enter your question. We will answer the questions at the end of our webcast during Q&A. Amy and Jake will have full visibility into the questions coming in throughout the course of the webinar, so we do encourage you to use this feature to not only ask questions, but to share your experiences in order to help guide the direction and relevance of the dialogue. Also, if you'd like to join the conversation on Twitter, please use the hashtag shown on the screen. Now, without any further ado, let's get started. Jake, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. Let's move on and get started with our discussion. So, over the last year and a half, if not longer, we've been looking at the future of licensing in the cloud. And in our discussions with a large number of our customers, as well as SaaS providers, as well as just other players in the space, we've found that the following key areas are things that are issue points or challenges for these providers in the SaaS experience today from a licensing standpoint. So when they're pricing and packaging, as well as when they're just involved in delivering a service to their customers. So things like limited feature building and costly repackaging, or the operational processes are fragmented between their on-premise portfolio and their SaaS-based offerings, impacting their customer experience. All of these have come together to create a group of challenges that they're working to address. So this webinar is a part of a series that speaks to a few of those challenges. So we're in the fourth webinar in the series of 5, and we'll be focused on pricing and packaging and how it affects your cloud and SaaS strategies. So Amy, I'd like to turn this over to you so you can get started.
Great. Thanks so much, and thanks, everybody. And just to give you a little bit of my background, I am an expert on software pricing and licensing, but I also have been covering and looking at the software as a service space for the better part of the last 12 years. So as Michelle indicated, pricing for software as a service, pricing for cloud is very much an art. But there's also a lot of science involved too, and I've discovered, looking over the last 10 years or so, there are a lot of commonalities. There's really a common framework for how companies have been developing successful strategies for pricing in the cloud. There's a lot of really case studies of best practices that we can glean from, and so what I wanted to do as I first started this part of the webinar is to talk a bit about what's the science aspect, what are the typical components that we see in almost every successful SaaS strategy, And before I do that, I want to just talk a little bit about, and this is going to be a refresher for folks that have been in the industry for a long time, but I think everyone talks about some of these buzzwords, cloud and SaaS, a little bit differently, and so I wanted to make it clear from IDC's perspective what we're talking about. And software as a service to us encompasses every type of software running from a network, cloud environment to a customer device, to access over a network. So it could be an application. It could be an operating system as part of a platform as a service. It could be infrastructure, storage resources, storage software, storage management software resources as a service. So software as a service to us is our umbrella term, and it's not just about applications. It's about lots of other types of software. So if you have a product that's code, basically written as a software application, and that's the resource that you want to make available to people in a cloud type of a format, that to us is software as a service. So that's why you see that title as part of my slides, even though this is a briefing on cloud. To us, a very large percentage of cloud is what we would consider software as a service. What we wouldn't consider software are things like accessing a box, a hardware resource, where the main thing is getting access to that hardware resource. That wouldn't be software as a service in the way we talk about it. So I wanted to just clarify that. Some of the key definitions here about what software as a service is, I think that these definitions are pretty much established out there. I'd say talking to people 8 or 7 years ago, I'd have to go through each one and make sure that everyone understands what we're talking about here. But I think we all kind of get what the technology infrastructure of a cloud service is. The one that I want to highlight, because obviously this is a pricing briefing, is that fine-grained pricing piece. One of the things that software as a service allows us to do is to get away from what's been wrong with traditional software pricing in the past. In the distributed computing client-server days, we had a license plus maintenance contract. It was a perpetual license. You were incented to buy a lot up front and then pay an ongoing maintenance fee on that. And for many reasons, this does not work in every customer scenario. That said, most software revenue today is still associated with this, but the fastest growing portion of the software industry is associated with subscription revenues, whether that be a software as a service or cloud offering, or even on-premise software offered in a subscription. When you talk about software as a service and you're giving access to resources to a customer over a network, over the web as a service, there are some really interesting things that you can do in terms of the types of metrics and the types of meters that you offer, just by nature of the fact that you or a service provider that you designate is running the single instance of the application for many customers. So there's a lot of tracking that you can do in that environment that's really hard to do in an on-premise environment, especially after the fact, when the customer's already installed the software and you've got an established way of pricing. So that in of itself and the whole subscription model brings a lot of unique features and attributes to a SaaS pricing approach, as well as opens a realm of possibilities that really haven't been available in the software world before. And by nature of the fact that you're making a transition away from a product model, which was the traditional way of pricing things. I'm going to hand you this physical CD or mail it to you in a huge box, and you're going to take the physical thing and install it, till instead, and I think this is a much better way of thinking about software resources anyway, you're going to get access to something that's going to help you do something. We're going to complete a business process for you. We're going to get something done, and you're going to be making an ongoing decision whether to pay us based on whether or not we are making you successful in your business objectives. So it's much more relationship focused, much more of an iterative process, starting off maybe small and growing over time versus the perpetual way of pricing. And so a lot of really exciting things about what a SaaS contract can, or SaaS type of pricing can do, but also raises a lot of issues and questions. And so, as I said, I wanted to talk about some of the science behind it. And so here are some key components that we see in every single SaaS contract, that should be there. The basic model is a subscription model, of course. The pricing metrics are typically user-based. And one of the reasons is because software as a service, although I mentioned it's not just about applications, most of the software out there that has been around for a while and has been successful in the software as a service space are applications. So, and applications themselves are typically priced based on users because that's what makes the most sense. How many business users are accessing this business service, this business application service? So you see a lot of user-based types of metrics, and like I said, there are a lot of possibilities because of the metering and tracking capabilities that you have when you're running an instance of an application for the customer as opposed to the customer running an on-premise application. But we don't really see as much experimentation on that as you might expect. A lot of the metrics are the same as we've seen in software for a while. And if you remember, that hasn't been the challenge in the industry. The metrics themselves weren't the problem in terms of what was broken in every case. What was broken was often the traditional license plus maintenance approach and the cultural, the culture around that on the vendor side and on the customer side. So a lot of those metrics that you see today are the same. And in some cases, you can do different things with software as a service, but that might not make the most sense. The value equation for what's the best metric might be the same for a SaaS application or an on-premise application or an appliance or however you're thinking about delivering your application. Now, the term, I talked about subscription as being the basic model, and I didn't elaborate on that because I knew I was going to talk about term here. The way that the difference between subscription and perpetual is pretty basic. You think of anything that you subscribe to in your non-tech life. I subscribe to a magazine, or I subscribe to a gym membership, or a whole host of things where I pay on a recurring basis to get access to something, whether it's access to the gym or access to the content in the magazine or access to the online service. And as long as I continue to pay for that access, I get the access. And from a term perspective in software as a service, you could, of course, do month to month. You could do multi-year. The average where things tend to pan out is the annual contract. And I'll tell you why. One of the reasons, month to month, yes, you could do that. You could even do day to day. As a consumer, do I really, and think about this from a business user perspective too, do I really want to have to cut a PO every month? Do I really want to have to go through the thought process of making a decision on this application service or software service or cloud application that I'm accessing every month? A lot of customers tell us that probably, they'd rather just kind of set it and forget it. Maybe think about it every year. Maybe when they're trying something, that's where you might want to have a shorter term contract. But once we've committed that, yep, this is something that's very useful for us, for our business, for our department, chances are they're probably going to want to sign something of it at least a year. Another thing that we see as well, and this is the nature of subscription approaches, one of the challenges or downfalls that customers think about when they think of subscription is, I'm signing up for a term, and then I become really reliant on that application. What happens in that next term in terms of what I pay? Can that price go up? Because I'm breaking away from that old term and I'm going to a new term. What's to say that the price hasn't increased in that point? And also, maybe I would like to sign a longer-term contract in exchange for something. Usually it's in exchange for either locking in that price, so the price today is going to be the same price for you in 2 years or in 3 years, or in getting some sort of a discount for my commitment. Now that's a very common scenario in SaaS pricing. You usually see there might be a 1-year, a 3-year, and even a 5-year option. The per unit price is going to go down as you scale out in time for what that option might be. And I think that as long as customers have the choice between those terms, that it's a very customer-friendly approach, in my opinion. And I see that in many cases as being the average. Another thing that's important to note about the term is that the revenue recognition piece and billing, which are tied together, the billing often for that term, even if it's a 1-year term, is typically upfront. So I'm signing a 1-year term, and generally the standard policy is that you pay as a customer for that 1-year term at the beginning of the service. Now, the revenue, of course, is not recognized at that point in time because we have to recognize as the service is delivered. That's part of the revenue recognition rules around subscriptions and software as a service. But that money goes into sits in a deferred account at the vendor, and if it's a public company, that deferred account is something that they report to the financial community. And more, as more software companies adopt subscription and software as a service type approaches, having a large amount of money in deferred is looked on as a very good thing. And of course, maintenance revenue in the past has worked this way as well. And so, the revenue recognition, as I mentioned, is going to be ratable over the term of the agreement, but a lot of companies, software as a service firms, have some professional services that they may offer. The implementations are a lot shorter, a lot smaller scale than an on-premise implementation, but there may be some implementation costs that are collected up front to help address the fact that there are startup costs associated with signing a new customer and getting them on that service in some cases. So there may be a professional services component that's recognized at a different schedule than the actual subscription service. There are service level agreements which usually guarantee things like disaster recovery, availability. There may be some other elements as well in there, and typically there's money back if terms aren't met. So if the SLA isn't met, money's given back. That's been the standard since the days of the ASP, which I used to look at many years ago. And another component of SaaS contracts that are unique is the scale up and down. Now, if you think back on the on-premise traditional license plus maintenance days, there really was no way to scale down from an accounting perspective, especially because perpetual license revenue is recognized up front. So it's really difficult to give licenses back to a software company that's already recognized revenue. They will really, probably will do it for some really big companies in specific cases, but it's definitely not part of standard policy. Now, in the case of subscription, because you're not, you're subscribing to the software and you're getting access to it during a defined period of time, the scaling up and scaling down is a lot easier from a back-end accounting perspective, and it's certainly expected from a customer perspective. And when you get to the more utility or actual pay-per-use, not pay-per-user pricing models, you have to think about having a metered approach that may scale up and down very dynamically. So you've got a different price that you're paying within a month, within a day. I mean, you could make it very granular depending on what your customers ultimately want and what makes sense. But there is, no matter what, if you're charging on an annual basis and you've got a basic per user amount, there is an expectation from the customer perspective that you're going to scale up and be able to scale down. A few other considerations, I talked about that metering and being able to scale up and down very dynamically. Predictability is really, really important. So you want a consistent cost of goods sold and recurring revenue, and customers want to have some predictability as well. One of the things that you will start to bump up against, if you haven't already, if you have a highly metered and tracked metric. So you're going to price on the actual number of transactions or something like that. If your customers have no idea how many transactions they need or how many they've used in the past, which if it's a type of software where it's not a brand new category, it's something that they already have, they probably don't have the capability to track that level of granularity now. So it's really difficult for customers to make that mental leap of what that type of approach might cost them. So I think the metering and tracking capability in many cases has to come before the actual pricing metric, especially if it's something that's going to be used in a large scale over a broad range of users where there isn't a lot of control over that going up or going down or changing dramatically if you're selling to an enterprise especially. So something to keep in mind, that predictability is key. I mentioned a little bit about the professional services and having some sort of setup fees. At the end of the day, the goal is to remove barriers to quickly get customer to value. You want to be able to start recognizing revenue as soon as possible, so you don't want a lengthy implementation time, and you want customers to, if you're signing an annual contract, you want to make sure they're getting a lot of value, 11 plus months out of that year, because you want them to renew. So that, removing barriers to get customers quickly to value minimizes the amount of setup time or setup fees that you want to have involved. But you might want to have, there may realistically be some migration, some other elements that you would get involved in that would where you'd incur some costs and need to recover some of those costs. Minimums, that's kind of a standard thing in any type of utility type of pricing approach, and something that we also see in the SaaS space, some differential pricing that there's some real competitive jockeying that can go on with software as a service, and that jockeying is very interesting when you look at it from the perspective of a traditional company with a traditional revenue base who may be established in the marketplace who now wants to get a software as a service option out there versus a company who's starting from a blank sheet of paper, a startup that's looking to run a software as a service and compete. So, certainly a lot of really interesting dynamics going on, and something that's going to make your experience very unique depending on who's in the market, who are you competing with, what's their orientation, what's your own company orientation. That's where a lot of the art's going to come into play, but there are actually some science involved as well. We've spent a lot of time looking at different types of companies, their orientation, and how they approach SaaS, as well as looking at different types of software. So we'll get into a little bit of that in this discussion, but it's hard to cover everything. And then finally, and I've been following this debate with a lot of interest because, like I said, I've been in the SaaS space for a very long time. I've been in the traditional software space looking at licensing for a long time. And software as a service has always been the anti-software. Remember years ago it was the, Salesforce.com announcing the death of software, and the path to enlightenment means no software. I mean, I remember like the early 2001 events that I attended around this, and one of the main points on the pricing side was we're going to be very transparent. We're going to tell you what our price is. It's going to be easy to predict, and it's going to be simple. Now, what's happened, and that's great because traditional pricing, there's a lot of things wrong with that on the complexity side. The challenge is, of course, the flip side is it's too vanilla. And software as a service vendors heard this early on with the functionality they offered, and they also heard it with the types of pricing models they offered. One size does not fit all. So then over time, what happens is software as a service companies, as they mature, start to add additions and options, and then their pricing, people argue, starts to look a lot like the traditional software pricing that's out there, and that it's really hard to figure out if you're a customer, what addition do I need and what price am I going to pay at the end of the day. So it's balancing that flexibility and as your pricing evolves, meeting the needs of your customers as they become more mature and more enterprise-oriented, but at the same time remembering that SaaS's roots, the roots of software as a service and cloud, are in simplicity. And I know we're going to get into that a little bit more with respect to to technology, ways to address that with technology. So I want to turn the floor over to Jake now. We're going to start talking a little bit about different business objectives that companies might have and how that might impact your pricing and packaging of software as a service and cloud.
Thanks, Amy. That was really a good way to frame our discussion. I appreciate you providing that background. So before we jump in any further, just a reminder, it would be great if anyone in the audience has specific pricing and packaging challenges that they're currently facing, or would like to share their specific use case. We'd like to definitely to try to include that in our Q&A, or even as we progress through the webinar, if it's appropriate, we'll stop and interject with those. So really, pricing and packaging starts with your business objectives. You need to first consider your business goals, then look at what options, what strategies you can consider from a pricing and packaging standpoint, and use those to drive to meet your objectives. So the best way, the best way to really think about this is at least from a webinar standpoint, is maybe break this up into a couple large categories, and we'll drill down from there. So one major category is if you're coming to market with a new offering. Let's say you're a pure play startup, really leading out with a SaaS only offering, or you're an existing ISV, mature existing on-premise portfolio, but your entry into SaaS is decidedly going to be a new market or new customer segment. So you're not really touching your existing customer base. So in either scenario, there's key considerations there. The other is if you're coming from an on-premise space and you're trying to augment your existing portfolio with SaaS, or even migrate over to SaaS completely. So we'll talk about those two major categories and drill down from each of those to highlight some strategies. So let's start out with kickstarting a new business offering. You've decided to launch with your SaaS offering. You're focused on a new segment, a new market. Your first challenge is to build a presence, build a customer base, get some market share, and then from there, that's when your focus will transition to optimizing revenue. So, in this scenario, it's much like launching a traditional packaged product. You're thinking about how to grow your business line. You're focused on market validation, product direction from your customer base, and maybe even potentially staking a claim against potential competitors. So let's jump into how to do that. So I've listed 3 models here on this slide: freemium, feature limited, and pay as you grow. Really, I could have listed 5 or 7. There's several different strategies to follow to develop an initial customer base, and much of it is dependent on your specific application and the market that you're targeting. But let's jump into some of these examples and use them as highlights so that we can talk through them. I think it's important to mention that really the key, before you even consider which models to leverage, the key is finding how to best tie the value of your service to your pricing model, and then balance that with your business objectives. Amy pointed out earlier that one of the benefits of SaaS, one of the things that SaaS offers us is the ability to more closely share the value in pricing, so have a shared value in the pricing that's offered. And I think we need to really focus on that, especially when trying to establish an initial customer base. So let's look at freemium. Freemium essentially it's been around for a while. I think everyone knows it from a B2C space, but freemium is really providing your core functionality for free, and then having a paid-for upgrade path with increased functionality, increased capabilities, in order to eventually drive revenue. So, why would someone consider the freemium model? I think there's several cases where freemium works. Collaborative capabilities, or some use cases where you have a community or a large group of users that need to interact. Freemium works well. The other scenario where freemium is a good choice is when the technology or the functionality is not well understood by the market. So a lot of the social networking type applications have started out with freemium for that reason, because it's definitely a disruption. It's new to the user base. You need to get a lot of people using it in order for it to gain some traction. So a couple key points when considering the freemium model is going into it. You need to be very clear on how to segment what's free and what's paid for premium. If you don't go in with that clear delineation, you're going to be you could run the risk of offering too much functionality in the free model and therefore never really make that transition to the revenue side of the equation. I think LinkedIn is a good example of the freemium model working well. For those that aren't familiar with LinkedIn, they're a business networking site for professionals. The core value that they offer to individuals is maintaining professional networks of their work associates and industry colleagues. They currently have about 80 million users. They have a market valuation of close to $1 billion based on their recent fundings that they've gotten. LinkedIn generates revenue in 3 ways: through premium subscriptions, corporate solutions such as recruiting services, and then also advertising. They use the freemium model to gain a large community of users. to build that base of users in order for them to leverage that user group for the community-based, the service-based offering to corporations, but also to demonstrate the value of the premium offerings that they had. They augmented that with revenue, in our advertising revenue. And I think it's important to understand that although advertising revenue is a part of their mix, it's actually one of the smaller portions of their revenue based on some of the estimates that have been released within PR. The freemium model works well here really for the reason of leveraging that community and making a clear differentiation between the value that's offered in the premium packages as compared to their free base subscriptions. Although this is an example of essentially a B2C play, it still highlights when to consider freemium. A customer that I spoke to not too long ago in the CAD space is taking a similar approach with collaborative services to their developer community. They've released these capabilities in pilot free to their community, to their user base, and they're seeing early adoption that's promising. Now they put a lot of investment in these collaborative services with no expectation to monetize those core features, but more with the expectation of offering premium services to various players in the supply chain. So that includes their existing customers, but also customers, their customers' customers, or others that are involved in that supply chain. They recognize that this opportunity for it to be successful really required that critical mass with the community to work. So they're optimistic about the progress that they've made thus far. I do think the freemium model works in enterprise, but you need to be very specific and focused in where you apply it. We can also look at feature limited, and really this isn't new. This is something that's been in the on-premise space for a long time. But limiting features with a relative low-cost barrier to entry is a great way to rapidly increase your customer base. And I think it's important to emphasize a relative low-cost barrier to entry. A good example is if you're thinking of entering the SaaS market with your application, and there's no one else in the market today that has done so, it's a great opportunity for you to take that same functionality and offer it as a service, and that be your competitive advantage. We've seen that happen. Obviously, Salesforce did that with CRM, but it's definitely an opportunity to offer a relative lower price without having to go for the freemium approach. So again, if there's an existing market value for the functionality that you plan to bring to market as a service, definitely look for that relative price differential. Excuse me. So this model is definitely better suited for that situation where a large community or collaborative type is not required for success, and is more focused in a situation where there's an existing market value for the capabilities that you're bringing to market. Going back to Amy's components of a SaaS contract, again, it's important to limit the barriers to entry. So you'll want to avoid the upfront fees or high setup fees, and give your users a way to enter and get established with your offering before without having those upfront fees. You might find other ways to incent them to move to higher price points and longer-term commitments, but you'll want to give them that early entry. So I think Salesforce is a good example of this, and it's an obvious one. But they've maintained their low entry point and very narrowly targeted the feature set that they're trying to solve for. And if you're familiar with Salesforce and their pricing, they also limit the number of users that can use that low edition. And then they use that as a way to move users as they grow, move enterprises or organizations as they grow up past that mark. So revenue growth really comes as the organization increases their user base and increases the features that they want to use. Let's talk about pay-as-you-grow. Pay-as-you-grow is a usage-based or a transaction-based model. So something that you're tying to that they're consuming. Where customers only pay for what they use with no recurring or base fees in the most strict sense of the definition. This model allows for dynamic and flexible pricing for your customers. And this is one of the aspects, one of the components of SaaS that is highly desirable from a customer standpoint. From an initial customer growth view, this is a good way to get customers to use your capabilities and then grow into a more stable pricing option. As an example, Confluent, which is an EDA firm out of Japan, actually launched their capabilities as a service. And in their press release, that was earlier this year, in their press release, they emphasized that their goal was to provide more flexible and immediate access to their software. They're definitely trying to use SaaS as a way to target the smaller end of the market with existing functionality that they've had. So we'll move on to talk about, once you have that customer base, how do you increase profitability? So once you've offered that low entry, whether it be freemium, or whether it be a very narrow set of features at a low entry price, or as a pay-as-you-grow model, you'll want to start to introduce additional packaging, flexibility, and additional diversity in your license models in order to really increase your profitability and optimize your revenue. So Skype, for example, is a free offering, but beyond that free offering, they have subscription models, but they also have usage models. So they've really taken different segments of their customer base and targeted them based on the packaging and the license models that they've chosen. I was speaking to a customer, a network appliance customer, and they're looking at adding services to their existing product portfolio. Their view on this is that they feel that they could most maximize profits from a usage-based model, but they recognize that in order for them to optimize to fit within their customer base, they'd also have to offer some subscription-based, fixed-based pricing in order for them to kind of meet all of their customer segments. So really looking at which license models work for your application, but also for the value proposition that your customers fit within. So I'd like to move on and talk a little bit about how to evolve as an established on-premise ISV and what strategies fit there. So if you look at the image, there's a hybrid vehicle, and you have that traditional gasoline engine fueling the car, and we can liken that to your the on-premise portion of your portfolio. Now, adding a small electric motor to your portfolio can really add a lot of efficiencies into your overall business. So I think hybrid is a good way of thinking of the on-premise mixed offering of on-premise capabilities plus package plus services. So I think it's important to think about this, is that services can complement the investments you've already made in your on-premise portfolio. And it's important to think of it not only from your viewpoint, but from your customers. So the value, the investments that your customers have made in your on-premise offerings over the years, they've become ingrained in using your capabilities. They're comfortable using your on-premise offerings. So extending those existing values that they get with services allows you to reinvest or increase the value that they get from those existing investments. I think this helps to protect your current maintenance revenue. It also protects your customer base. It keeps them focused on the value that you bring to them. So looking at how SaaS can augment on-premise to solve new problems is really an important strategy for established on-premise ISVs. So let's talk a little bit more about this. So what are some of the strategies from a hybrid standpoint? I'd like to first point out the image. You know, I don't know about you, but I don't yet drive a hybrid vehicle. But I can tell you that I'm a bit frustrated when I see one of these signs in the parking lot. I'm like, wait a minute, why don't I get preferential treatment? And I think the message here is that as an ISV with a mature on-premise offering, a strong customer base, I think hybrid offerings, similarly to preferred parking, you also with a hybrid offering will have preferential treatment, because you'll be able to demonstrate the flexibility of leveraging your on-premise deployment and service-based offerings to really meet the needs of any scenario. So one approach here is to offer complementary functionality, functionality that fits nicely with what you're already doing. Another option is to focus on increasing the value of the on-premise offering. So we've already spoken to that a little bit, but specifically solving use cases which can't be solved via an on-premise situation. I think one way, going back to a previous example, the CAD customer I was talking to, they're trying to add collaboration to their offering. That collaboration benefits their existing customers because it allows them to more efficiently get feedback in the supply chain process, the design process, the development process. In addition, it adds value not only to them but their customers as well, because they also get that quicker turn. It offers better visibility to what the final product's going to be and an opportunity to interact during that development process. So that use case couldn't be solved well with their current on-premise offering, and SaaS definitely allows them to extend that. Also, packaging your offerings, your existing functionality to solve specific use cases. So let's take a scenario where you have a very rich set of features. We'll say an accounting application. Excuse me. The core users of your application may only be 20 or 30 or a small percentage in a large organization that really use the majority of those features. And that makes sense. That's rightfully so. But there is value that you could extend to other users within the organization. And in many cases, it may be best to do this as a SaaS offering. There's no reason to repackage or to deliver another on-premise instance of your application when you could do a SaaS-based offering with just a few features to solve that need. So looking for opportunities to do that repackaging is really, really important. One graphics design company that I was speaking to, it's been about 6 months now. They felt that there was two things that they could do from a SaaS offering that would be useful. One was to offer an offline storage capability to provide some additional redundancy to their customers' environment. They were selling into the SMB market, so local IT staff was limited for most of their customers. And the other was to provide essentially a light graphics editor. So not a lot of the rich capabilities that their on-premise application offered, but essentially a markup capability. And both of those have gotten good feedback in their beta of those two offerings. So I'm going to move on and just look at this from a pricing and a packaging standpoint. I think it's important to remember that, especially when you're selling into your existing customer base, that you as the product manager or the one driving the SaaS initiative within your business, you may have come to terms about all the changes that are going to take place, but that doesn't mean that your customers have, and it doesn't mean that the rest of your organization has either. So I think it's important to be considerate of how you may need to ease into the transition of offering SaaS as part of your portfolio. So one way to do that is to initially use license models which fit the current offerings. So maybe you don't open up with a usage-based model. For example, maybe you start out with offering a service on an annual subscription and align it to your maintenance renewals, so that your internal organization doesn't have to change their processes too much in order for you to get that service in the market. But then over time, I think it's important for you to introduce new license models which better fit the service offerings that you've brought to market. So things like we've talked about already, flexible subscriptions, usage-based models, maybe even prepaid pools. So it could be a pool of seats, it could be a pool of usage, whatever that unit of usage may be. And then thinking about even more flexible options like overages or rollovers, things that you see in the mobile space. In talking to customers, they have really two concerns. One is how do I ease into this, or how do I? One customer said, well, I need a soft landing. I need an easy way to get into this so that I can really optimize my revenue or maximize my opportunity once I'm into offering services. So I strongly recommend that you consider how you're going to enter the market, both from a pricing, packaging, and as a overall strategy. So I'm going to let Amy share her point of view on this hybrid scenario and have her talk more there.
Okay, thanks. So when I typically get involved with folks that are trying to augment an existing perpetual business, say with a subscription SaaS business, I'm typically involved at the building the business case point. And so that usually involves a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of assumptions. And so what I wanted to share is some of the typical elements that I see and typical assumptions that people make in their spreadsheet. In general, they'll start with a perpetual license number, and they'll think about things like the amount of the maintenance renewal, maintenance attrition that they have, some of the existing costs of goods sold that they have on their perpetual model. And think about make some assumptions around what the renewal rate might be with a subscription. And when they develop the price point, the average break-even point where your cost of your subscription starts to become greater than the cost of your existing perpetual model is somewhere around year 3 to 4. It doesn't matter what type of software you have, what type of customer you're selling to. I've seen that in every single case. That's the industry standard, 3 to 4 years. What that means is that if your break even, you can calibrate your subscription price based on what you want to do, thinking about that 3 to 4 year break even. So for example, if you want to incent people to move over to the subscription, you'll push that break even out. If you want to keep customers on the perpetual model, which a lot of cautious vendors, they'll launch the software as a service offering just to say they have one, but in reality they hope no one chooses it. they'll push that break even up. So that, that's a point of time that's somewhat fixed. That's the science piece of the spreadsheet, and then everything else that you put in your spreadsheet is going to have some element of your unique situation and orientation, based on some of the elements that Jake had been talking about in his slides there. The other thing that you'll want to think about as you build this out is whether you want to have as I mentioned, a 1-year option, a 3-year option, and a 5-year option. And obviously there'll be some advantage from a pricing perspective to the customer if they choose that 5-year option from a per unit cost versus the 1-year option. So some things to think about there. The other X factor, if you are trying to, you're in an existing business, and I've worked with so many of these individuals over time. They've come into this company to build a SaaS business. It's very exciting. It's going to be the high growth portion of their overall company. It's really going to fuel that, bringing the company into the new age, bringing the company into the cloud space, the next paradigm. Oftentimes, those people end up getting very frustrated because they realize that although there's some lip service to the idea of software as a service and cloud within their business, the culture of the organization is oriented around the traditional perpetual business. And that culture, for simplicity's sake, it all comes down to selling. That culture is oriented around the elephant hunter DNA, get the biggest deal, hunt the biggest animals, sign those giant ELAs, and figure out what to do later. That type of culture doesn't really put much of a premium on selling these little subscription contracts that start off small and maybe grow over time, and they definitely don't put a premium on those if they interfere with their ability to hunt elephants. So you really have to think about the orientation of your company, and that's really the X factor of how successful you can be. You can come up with all the spreadsheets and build the best business case, but you really have to think, is this company truly committed to making this, thinking that this is an important part of their business, and maybe they're pushed there or pushed there by competitive dynamics, pulled there by customer dynamics, but all the way up to the chief executive's office has to be committed to, we're going to orient our business around this subscription culture. We're going to make sure we live up to our commitments. We're going to gather, that gatherer mentality. We're going to make our customers feel so overjoyed with us that they want to continue to pay us over time. They'll grow the contracts. We need to reorient our sales culture around harvesting that money over time. And that's really something that's difficult to define, that culture piece, but it's really important. And that's frankly why so many software as a service efforts within large traditional software companies have not been as successful as they could be. So I want to pass it back over to Jake to talk about some technology considerations, primarily because I led off by talking about the simplicity and flexibility challenges that you face when pricing for this space, and there are a lot of ways that technology can help mitigate those. So I'll turn it back over to Jake to talk about those now.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, so from a technology standpoint, the balance between simplicity and flexibility is an important one. And our view is that to be successful with a SaaS experience, you need the following components in order to really deliver on that balance of simplicity with flexibility. The ability to be versatile in your packaging, be able to quickly address new opportunities through new models. The ability to have business intelligence driven from that usage information to support some of those usage billing type models, and also to have a strong back office support to deliver an integrated on-premise and SaaS offering. So we don't really have a lot of time to dig in, unfortunately, because we have about 5 minutes left. But to just say, over the last close to 2 years now, we've been working to identify those problem areas and then to build a solution to support licensing and licensing management for companies delivering services. And if this is something that is interesting to you, we're in beta. So I urge you to go to www.sentinelcloud.com and check us out, and we're happy to get you involved in what we're doing. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. I think we might have a few minutes left for Q&A, so we'll see if we can do that.
Great, thank you, Jake. So we'll try to get a couple of questions in there before the line cuts off. I just wanted to let everyone know if you have submitted a question thus far, we will follow up with you directly in the next 24 hours with an answer to you via email. Any additional questions that anyone does have that they didn't have the opportunity to ask here on the webinar, you can reach Amy, Jake, myself, the entire team by emailing sas@safenet-inc.com. Regardless of who your question is for, we'll make sure that it's routed to the correct person and you receive an answer promptly. So if we look into Q&A, so let's see if there's the one that we can address quickly. So the first question that came in are, what are best practices for volume pricing discounts?
So I can address that, and I think on the one hand, and I mentioned that the discounts for commitment, so length of term that we see, so that's very common in the space, and that's something that's different than what we've seen in the traditional space, where the discounts were primarily solely around volume versus commitment time, since everyone was committing to a perpetual license. There are also some volume discounts that you might think about, and typically you'd want to tier those, and they're very similar to, I would say, the types of approaches that we see in the on-premise space. So as an example, an enterprise type agreement where the company is standardizing on your solution for their overall enterprise. And so there may be a special offering or special program that you put together for that type of an approach. Maybe it makes sense to have some sort of a site volume orientation, which would maybe be similar to an enterprise, but as opposed to being the entire enterprise, it might be just a specific site or department of an enterprise, and you might want to have a specific set of rules of engagements there. At the end of the day, what I suggest you do is think about it from a programmatic standpoint and what makes sense. What types of commitments do you want to reward? So, like I said, there's a standard reward for committing to a certain term of contract. Maybe there's a standard reward for committing at an enterprise level, and then maybe there's a standard reward and a set of policies around companies that commit at a certain volume. It could be number of users, number of transactions, those types of things, and there's a set of rewards. So, yeah, I would really encourage people to think about it programmatically versus just thinking about it, if you have this many transactions, it's this price, this many transactions, it's this price. And what that allows you to do is think about what other, in addition to maybe some differential on the pricing, what other types of commitments or benefits do you want to give people who are committing at high levels to you? So, for example, there might be some sort of a council or community that they are a part of or a greater part of if they commit at higher levels to you. So I think there are a lot of possibilities, and may not be one size fits all, but there are some standard practices that can be carried over and that customers expect to see, particularly those customers that are coming from the enterprise side.
Great, thanks, Amy. So I think that we have time for one more. The platform, I believe, enables us to go about 5 minutes over, but just a reminder, any additional questions that don't get answered, please do email them to sas@safenet-inc.com. So the next question that I will put out there towards our presenters is, when transitioning a traditional perpetual-based license model, Salesforce, to SaaS, and with respect to the company culture, what is the best way to construct a compensation plan that is focused on long-term annuity plan versus elephant hunting commissions?
I can take a stab at that also, and maybe Jake has some thoughts as well. We've seen people try a number of different things. Typically what you're going to need to do if you expect your elephant hunters to sell this, or at least to recognize when SaaS is an opportunity, is to provide some compensation for them that's equal to the total value of the deal, as opposed to paying them as you recognize the revenue. So there may be some financing that you'd need to do. What I've seen most organizations consider or think of is taking their existing inside sales team you might already have that's used to selling maintenance, or maybe it's used to working with partners, and
that may be a logical place to find some of your gatherer type folks, because they're used to selling that ongoing relationship with the customer, and they're likely incented for getting those renewals, for growing those renewals over time. And those might be the folks that you want to target for being the primary interface with your SaaS opportunities. We've also seen companies have overlay sales organizations. So similar to in the past, you might have a consulting sales rep that would go along or be brought in by the on-premise sales rep when there's a consulting opportunity. Having something similar where you have regional software as a service overlay reps that might work with the on-premise reps to identify opportunities where on-premise is not a good fit and software as a service is a good fit. It's certainly not going to alleviate all of your challenges, and I think that the best practices in this area are still evolving. I don't think that any one on-premise traditional vendor has cracked the code for managing these cultures simultaneously, but those are some of the different options that people have tried and that have been somewhat successful.
And just to add to that, I think the overlay approach is definitely a good way to start, because you can leverage your existing sales staff and then have, for example, one or two overlay sales folks focused on your SaaS offering, and then use that as a way to transition to a more scalable approach over time. Michelle, I just saw the 2-minute warning. Should we just do a quick wrap-up on the webinar?
Yep, so I just want to take this opportunity to thank Jake and Amy again for their excellent information and insight. The webinar will be available on demand via the BrightTalk platform that you're all logged into now. It'll be available immediately after the event for viewing. Again, if you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to email us at sas@safenet-inc.com. If the questions are for Amy, we'll get them to her. If they're for Jake, we'll get them to him. And I think that is just about it. So thank you for joining. Have a great day.